For centuries, history has been shaped by the victors, and as a result, many texts, documents, and knowledge have been erased or suppressed. The Catholic Church, as one of the most powerful institutions in history, played a fundamental role in deciding what should or should not be passed down to humanity. But what happens when a text threatens the power structure and challenges truths that have been taught for generations? What happens when a manuscript presents a vision of faith so different, so liberating, that it could jeopardize religious authority? These texts are not merely banned, they are eradicated from history, persecuted as heretical, and their copies burned so they can never be read again. Among all the forbidden texts throughout the centuries, there is one that stands out. It was so dangerously revolutionary that it disappeared completely for more than 1,500 years until it was rediscovered by chance in Egypt. This gospel contained teachings that could transform the way we perceive faith, divinity, and the very essence of human existence. But why was this book erased from history? What was in it that made the Church go to such lengths to ensure that no one would ever find it? Since the early centuries of Christianity, the Catholic Church has played an ambiguous role in both preserving and destroying religious texts. On one hand, medieval monastery scribes were responsible for transcribing and maintaining records of the Bible and theological writings. On the other hand, the Church itself also ordered the destruction of works it deemed heretical. But what determined what was sacred and what should be erased? Who decided which texts were legitimate and which were too dangerous to be read? The answer to this question takes us to the Council of Nicaea, held in 325 after Christ, under the command of Emperor Constantine. At this gathering, church leaders determined which Gospels would be included in the New Testament and which would be rejected. Many texts, now known as apocryphal and Gnostic Gospels, were declared heretical and simply excluded from official doctrine. But these books were not merely alternative versions of the Christian faith. They contained messages that challenged the very power structure of the Church. The decision to exclude certain texts was not just theological but also political. The Church needed a unified narrative to strengthen its authority, and any manuscript suggesting a different relationship between God and mankind, or questioning the role of the clergy, was a threat. What would happen if the faithful discovered that Jesus taught a path to God without the need for intermediaries? What if a text revealed that true salvation did not depend on rituals or institutions, but rather on self-knowledge and enlightenment? Thus began a systematic process of persecution against texts deemed dangerous. In the 4th century, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Emperor Theodosius I, the destruction of manuscripts considered heretical intensified. Followers of beliefs deemed deviant were persecuted, and their books were burned in public squares. But burning books was not enough. The Church sought to completely eradicate these teachings so they could never be accessed again. The Index of Forbidden Books, officially created in the 16th century, was one of the Church's most effective tools for controlling knowledge. It listed works considered dangerous to faith and morality, prohibiting their reading and circulation. The index included everything from scientific writings, such as those of Galileo Galilei, to theological texts proposing different interpretations of Christianity. The objective was clear: control information to keep the power structure intact. However, not all forbidden manuscripts were destroyed. Some were hidden by dissident monks and followers of alternative doctrines, buried in remote locations, or secretly preserved by persecuted groups such as the Gnostics and Cathars. This is how some texts managed to survive through time, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. One of the greatest examples of this resistance was the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, between 1946 and 1956, in caves near Qumran, in the West Bank. These manuscripts contained Jewish religious texts and some of the oldest versions of the Old Testament. But there was something even more intriguing. Many of these writings presented ideas that did not align with the official narrative of Christianity and Judaism, suggesting that alternative versions of spirituality had been suppressed. Another equally impactful discovery was the Nag Hammadi library, found in 1945 in Egypt. These texts, written in Coptic, contained a collection of Gnostic Gospels that had been erased from history by the Church. And it was precisely in this library that one book, in particular, caught the attention of scholars: the Gospel of Truth. This Gospel, attributed to one of early Christianity's greatest theologians, Valentinus, contained teachings that could completely change the way Christian faith was understood. But why was this Gospel so dangerous? Did it contain something that could destabilize the Church? What was written in this book that made it the target of persecution and eradication for centuries? When we think of the Gospels that shaped Christianity, we imagine stories of miracles, parables, and Jesus' journey to the cross. But what if there were texts that spoke of something entirely different? What if there was a gospel that did not portray Jesus as a sacrificial redeemer, but rather as a master of consciousness, whose true purpose was to awaken humanity from a deep spiritual slumber? The Gospel of Truth, one of the most intriguing manuscripts discovered in the Nag Hammadi library, is one of the few records that grant us access to this hidden perspective of Christianity. Attributed to Valentinus, a Christian theologian from the 2nd century, this gospel does not describe events from Jesus' life, but instead presents the foundations of a lost knowledge, a spiritual truth that was revealed only to those prepared to understand it. The text suggests that humanity lives in a state of forgetfulness and ignorance, unable to recognize its true divine nature. According to this view, human suffering does not stem from original sin, as traditional Christianity teaches, but rather from a lack of awareness of who we truly are. Could this idea completely change the way we understand spirituality? For the followers of this gospel, Jesus was not a necessary sacrifice to atone for humanity's sins. Instead, he was a bringer of light who came to reveal the true nature of existence. His mission was not to establish a new religion, but to teach an internal path to awakening. Humanity's error, according to the Gospel of Truth, was not in breaking moral rules, but in believing it was separate from the divine. This perspective directly contradicts one of the core pillars of established Christianity, the necessity of intermediaries for salvation. If every human being already carries a direct connection to God, then why would priests, churches, and rituals be necessary? This question becomes even more provocative when we analyze another fundamental aspect of the gospel, its concept of God. Unlike the God of the Old Testament, who punishes, judges, and demands obedience, the Gospel of Truth describes a divinity that is pure love and understanding. According to this text, the true God does not seek submission but knowledge. He did not create the material world as a realm of trials and suffering, but rather as a distorted reflection of the true spiritual reality. This idea closely resembles Eastern philosophies, which describe the physical world as an illusion that must be transcended. But how does this fit within the context of Christianity? The Gnostics believed that the material world was the creation of a lesser being, known as the demiurge, who kept humanity imprisoned in illusion. The Gospel of Truth suggests that Jesus came to break this cycle of forgetfulness and ignorance, bringing a wisdom that would allow people to see beyond the imposed reality. This portrayal of Jesus as a liberator of secret knowledge challenges the entire traditional narrative of redemption. If Jesus did not come to be a sacrifice, then what was the true meaning of his presence on earth? The text answers this question in a surprising way. He came to remind us of who we truly are. And this truth was hidden not because God wanted to conceal it, but because humanity itself had forgotten it. One of the most striking passages in the Gospel of Truth states, "When truth appeared, ignorance was destroyed. The light shone upon the darkness and dissolved it. The path to truth was revealed to those who were ready to see it." What does this passage truly mean? The Gospel suggests that darkness, meaning human suffering, is not caused by divine condemnation but by a lack of knowledge about one's own essence. When this truth is revealed, the weight of guilt and fear disappears. But this leads us to a disturbing question. Why was this vision of Christianity erased from history? If humanity had known that salvation does not come from obedience to dogma but from the awakening of consciousness, how would that have changed the history of religion? Would we have had a form of Christianity more similar to Buddhism, focused on the pursuit of self-knowledge? Or would the Church never have consolidated itself into the powerful institution we know today? The Gospel of Truth proposes that each individual already possesses everything needed to attain spiritual fulfillment. What is missing are not rituals, rules, or divine intermediaries. What is missing is remembrance. And this remembrance can only be accessed by those who seek beyond the surface. But the Church could not allow this knowledge to spread. The idea of a Christianity based on inner awakening directly threatened its authority. That is why the Gospel of Truth was persecuted and eradicated. What followed was one of the greatest censorship operations in history. A massive effort not only to destroy a book, but to eliminate an entire school of thought that could have transformed Western spirituality. But did they truly succeed in erasing this knowledge forever? Or does the truth always find a way to survive? Since the early centuries of Christianity, power and spiritual truth have been in constant conflict. In the beginning, there were various interpretations of Jesus' message, and small groups scattered throughout the Roman Empire preserved their own traditions and teachings. But as the Church consolidated itself as a powerful institution, it became clear that this diversity of thought was a threat to the emerging religious and political dominance. The Gnostics, one of the most influential Christian groups of the time, were quickly labeled as heretics. Their writings presented a very different Jesus from the one promoted by the official Church, not a redeemer demanding submission, but a teacher encouraging the pursuit of self-knowledge. This vision not only weakened the Church's role as an intermediary between God and the faithful, but also challenged the notion of a punitive God who required blind obedience. If the truth was within each individual, what need was there for a religious institution? Faced with this risk, the Church launched one of the largest campaigns to eradicate knowledge ever seen in history. The persecution began ideologically, with theologians such as Irenaeus of Lyon and Hippolytus of Rome writing treatises condemning the false Christians and classifying Gnostic teachings as the work of the devil. But soon, this condemnation turned into a movement of real violence against those who dared to question ecclesiastical authority. One of the first offensives against the Gnostics took place in Egypt, where many followers of these doctrines lived in isolated communities. Around the 4th century, Roman troops were sent to destroy temples and libraries that preserved writings deemed heretical. The Temple of Serapis, in Alexandria, was one of the most emblematic targets. This temple housed a vast collection of esoteric and Gnostic knowledge, but it was reduced to ashes by order of Christian bishops who sought to eliminate all traces of idolatry and heresies. But this was not the only mass destruction of knowledge. Historical records indicate that other libraries and Gnostic study centers were attacked, and many of their followers fled to remote regions. But how far were they able to protect their texts? How many lost books were burned before we even knew of their existence? During the Middle Ages, even centuries after the formal disappearance of Gnosticism, the persecution continued. The Bogomils in Bulgaria and the Cathars in southern France were groups that preserved beliefs similar to those of the ancient Gnostics. They believed that the material world was an imperfect creation, that the Church had distorted Jesus' true message, and that salvation did not depend on religious dogma. How did the Church respond to this? With extermination. The crusade against the Cathars, in the 13th century, was one of the most brutal episodes of the Inquisition. Thousands were killed, and their cities were destroyed. The burning of books was one of the first steps to ensure that their philosophy would never spread again. The phrase, "kill them all, God will recognize his own," allegedly spoken by a Catholic commander while ordering the massacre of the city of Béziers, summarizes the mentality of the time. The persecution was so effective that, for centuries, it was believed that Gnostic texts had been completely eradicated. There was not a single copy of the Gospel of Truth available anywhere in the world. But did the Church really succeed in erasing this knowledge forever? Or were some of these manuscripts hidden, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered? The answer to this question came in 1945, when a twist of fate brought to light documents that had been buried for over 1,500 years. The Nag Hammadi library proved that Gnostic teachings had not completely disappeared. But what exactly was found? And why did the Church remain silent about this discovery? History has a curious way of recovering what has been forgotten. No matter how much the Church tried to erase certain texts from existence, some survived, buried by those who knew they would one day be rediscovered. The Gospel of Truth is one such case. For centuries, it existed only as a reference in the writings of bishops who condemned it as heresy. But then, in an unexpected turn of events, it resurfaced. However, the most intriguing question is not just its rediscovery, but what happened afterward. When the Nag Hammadi manuscripts were found in Egypt in 1945, scholars quickly realized they had uncovered an invaluable treasure. However, the publication and dissemination of these texts took decades. Unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls, which immediately captured media and public attention, the Gnostic texts remained restricted to a small academic circle for many years. But why? If this discovery was so significant, why did the world take so long to gain access to it? Part of the explanation lies in the very content of these texts. The Gospel of Truth presented a version of Christianity vastly different from the one preached by the Church for centuries. It did not speak of a God who demanded sacrifices or of a Christ who came to suffer and die. Instead, it described a Jesus who brought knowledge, who freed people from ignorance. This message could be extremely unsettling for religious institutions built upon the ideas of sin, guilt, and redemption. Another factor that contributed to the delay was the struggle for control over the translation and publication of the texts. For years, access to the manuscripts was restricted to a select few scholars. Some researchers believe there was a deliberate effort to slow the dissemination of these documents, as their publication could raise delicate questions about the history of the Church and the selection of biblical texts. And then, an even more intriguing detail emerged. Parts of the Gospel of Truth were missing. When scholars began examining the manuscript, they realized that some pages had either been lost or removed. The question is, did these pages naturally deteriorate over the centuries, or were they deliberately taken out? If the removal was intentional, what could have been on those pages? Could they have contained information that would radically change our understanding of Jesus? Or perhaps they revealed something about the role of the Church in suppressing these teachings. If the rest of the Gospel was already considered dangerous, we can only imagine that the missing sections might have contained something even more impactful. Another little discussed fact is that the Gospel of Truth was not the only rediscovered text that was met with silence. The Gospel of Judas, found in the 1970s, suffered a similar fate. This text suggested that Judas Iscariot did not betray Jesus, but rather followed his instructions to fulfill a divine plan. Similarly, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which portrays Mary Magdalene as one of Jesus' closest disciples, was discovered in fragments, and its authenticity was questioned for decades. Why is it that when these texts finally come to light, they are met with such resistance? What becomes clear is that the Gospel of Truth did not merely survive the passage of time, it survived a deliberate attempt to be erased from history. Its discovery in the 20th century represents a direct challenge to the official narrative of Christianity. But the lingering question remains: how many other forbidden texts are locked away in the Vatican's secret archives, waiting to be revealed? If this gospel remained hidden for centuries yet still managed to resurface, how many hidden truths are still waiting for the right moment to be discovered? The Catholic Church has a long history of fiercely guarding its official narrative. Since the earliest centuries of Christianity, the definition of what was considered sacred always passed through the Church's scrutiny, and any deviation from its doctrine was met with strict opposition. It is no surprise, then, that the Vatican has never officially commented on the Gospel of Truth. But the Church's silence does not merely imply disinterest. Throughout history, silence has often been as powerful a strategy as direct censorship. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts was a historic event, yet it did not receive the same level of attention as other religious archaeological findings. Unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls, which quickly captivated scholars and the media, the Gnostic manuscripts remained confined to a closed circle of academics for decades before being translated and made available to the public. But was this delay merely due to linguistic and academic challenges? Or was something else at play? The Church had faced similar challenges before. On numerous occasions, documents that could alter the perception of Christianity were discovered, only to be classified as heretical or simply vanish from circulation. The Vatican's secret archives remain one of the most mysterious locations in the world. Officially, they are merely a collection of the Church's historical documents, yet access to these records is highly restricted. Even scholars who obtain permission to research there must undergo a rigorous selection process and are often allowed to view only specific documents, many times without being able to fully disclose their findings. Among the records stored in these archives, there are reports suggesting the existence of apocryphal gospels that have never been made public, as well as records from church councils and decrees that could reveal how certain texts were deliberately excluded from Christian tradition. If the Gospel of Truth remained hidden for centuries until it was accidentally found, how many other documents are still locked away on the Vatican's shelves? The Church's approach to archaeological discoveries also raises questions. On multiple occasions, scholars and archaeologists working with ancient manuscripts have faced resistance in securing funding or institutional support. Discoveries that challenge the official Christian narrative often fade into obscurity, receiving little to no attention from mainstream media. And when they are finally acknowledged, the Church takes a cautious stance, rarely making statements that might validate or refute the findings. This approach can be seen as a strategy to avoid public debates on topics that could shake the faith of believers. After all, if a lost gospel contradicts official teachings, what position should the Church take? But it is not only texts like the Gospel of Truth that have been suppressed throughout history. Historical records suggest that many Gospels and theological documents have simply disappeared. The case of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is particularly intriguing. Mentioned by ancient theologians, this text nearly vanished, leaving behind only a few fragmented sections. The Gospel of Judas, which presents an entirely different perspective on Jesus' betrayal, only surfaced in the 1970s and remained in obscure negotiations before being translated and published. These documents force us to ask, how many other texts are lost or hidden? The suppression and disappearance of religious texts were not practices limited to the early centuries of Christianity. During the Middle Ages, the Church maintained strict control over which books could be read and taught. The Index of Forbidden Books, which was in effect from 1559 to 1966, listed works deemed dangerous to the faith and morality of believers. This list included scientific and philosophical books, as well as alternative versions of the scriptures. But was it only well-known books that were included? Or were ancient manuscripts, ones that could reshape our understanding of Christianity, also subjected to this control? Given so many examples of suppression and censorship throughout history, the Vatican's silence regarding the Gospel of Truth becomes even more significant. This is not merely about the rediscovery of an ancient text, it is about the impact it could have on the perception of Christianity. If the Church were to acknowledge the authenticity of this gospel, it would set a dangerous precedent. After all, if one lost gospel can be considered valid after centuries of concealment, why not others? If a hidden text can reveal teachings different from those the Church has transmitted, does that not mean that Christian faith has been selectively shaped over time? What becomes evident is that the history of Christianity is far more complex than the official version presented over the centuries. The Gospel of Truth survived against all odds, and its existence raises questions that extend beyond religion. It compels us to ask, what really happened in the first centuries of Christianity? How did the Church decide which teachings would be preserved and which would be erased? And most importantly, what other secrets are still waiting to be uncovered? Throughout history, the Catholic Church has not only shaped Christian faith but also controlled what could or could not be disclosed about its origins. Many believe that the Vatican's secret archives contain documents that could rewrite the history of Christianity, but there is something even more intriguing. Records that were mentioned in historical documents but mysteriously disappeared over the centuries. What happened to these manuscripts? Were they destroyed, or are they still hidden, waiting to be revealed? Among the texts that were allegedly erased from history, there are records of Gospels that spoke of hidden teachings passed on by Jesus only to his closest disciples. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, for example, suggests that Mary was not just a follower but someone who received spiritual teachings that Peter and the other disciples did not fully understand. Another enigmatic document is the Gospel of Judas, which presents a radically different view of Jesus' betrayal, suggesting that he and Judas had a secret agreement. These Gospels were deemed heretical, but there are accounts that other similar texts existed and were mentioned in ancient records before disappearing without a trace. The Church has always played an active role in preserving knowledge, but also in censoring ideas that could challenge it. During the fall of Constantinople in 1453, many ancient Christian manuscripts vanished or were destroyed. Some theories suggest that before the Ottoman invasion, certain documents were removed from the city and taken to Rome, where they were locked away in the Vatican, never to be seen again. Could these documents have included Gospels or writings that depicted a version of Christianity vastly different from the one we know today? Another mysterious episode involves the destruction of records belonging to the Order of the Knights Templar, one of the most powerful organizations of the Middle Ages. When the order was dissolved by Pope Clement V in 1312, documents related to its rituals and knowledge were confiscated by the Church and vanished completely. Some believe that the Templars possessed secret information about the early Christians and even unknown bloodlines linked to Jesus. If these records existed, where are they now? The suppression of spiritual teachings was not limited to Christianity. During the Middle Ages, the Church fiercely opposed any tradition that deviated from official doctrine. Historical accounts indicate that texts related to Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and ancient mystery schools were banned and burned because they promoted the idea that human beings could reach the divine through self-knowledge, without the need for a religious institution. If these teachings had been widely accepted, how would the Church have maintained its position as the intermediary between God and the faithful? The Vatican's silence regarding these documents raises an inevitable question. What exactly needs to be kept secret? This is not just about ancient manuscripts, but possibly knowledge that could change how we understand spirituality, and even the history of humanity. Some researchers believe that among the hidden records, there may be accounts of events that were deliberately excluded from the official Christian narrative. There are even speculations that within the Vatican's vaults, there could be descriptions of celestial phenomena interpreted as mystical visions, but which might have much more complex meanings than we imagine. If the gospel of truth remained hidden for over a millennium before being accidentally rediscovered, how many other truths are still waiting to come to light? What would happen if the world discovered that the history of Christian faith was shaped selectively and that many of the original teachings were erased to strengthen the Church's authority? If history has taught us anything, it is that the truth can never be completely destroyed. It merely waits for the right moment to be revealed. The story of the gospel of truth shows us that spirituality has always been a battleground between knowledge and control. For centuries, texts that could expand our understanding of faith have been hidden, censored, or simply erased from history. But no matter how hard they try to silence the truth, it always finds a way to emerge. The rediscovery of this gospel, along with other Gnostic texts, proves that there is much more to the history of Christianity than what has been officially taught. And if this document remained concealed for so long, how many other secrets are still hidden in the shadows, waiting to be revealed? If there's one thing we can learn from all this, it's that knowledge has always been a threat to those in power. But is humanity ready to uncover everything that has been lost? And more importantly, what would happen if these secrets came to light? How would it change the way we see our faith, our spirituality, and even our history? Perhaps there are still many truths waiting to be unearthed, and when that happens, the world will never be the same again. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've handpicked some fascinating videos full of profound knowledge and incredible discoveries that you're going to love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step toward transforming your reality.